On Errol and the Bad Guy, I was asked an interesting question on the show. Errol was too, but one of the topics that was posed was, who's next to challenge Jon Jones? Who's in the division that can challenge Jon Jones? Now, I really liked Errol's answer because he told me something that I had overlooked, which is that Luke Rockhold has officially moved into the 205-pound class. I like that. Say what you want about that match. To who's going to win and how competitive it's going to be. Break that down however you want. I would tune in to watch that match. I would tune in to watch Luke Rockhold take on Jon Jones. Absolutely, I would. And when you look at the other names, and I don't want to dismiss anybody as though their skills aren't good, but there is most certainly a perception within this sport that the better fighter is whoever's name you know. And if a guy doesn't have a big name, then he's not a great fighter. And I could prove to you 1,000,000 times how that's right. In fact, I think I will. I think I will use an example for you right now because it happened over the weekend, which was Reyes versus Ozdemir. I think we have lost touch a little bit just how good Ozdemir is. Only guys that have beat him in a meaningful period of time, two-time champion of the world named Daniel Cormier, and the number one contender for a world title, Anthony Smith. He's beaten everybody else, and quite frankly, he beat Reyes. He lost the decision, but he won the fight. It was one of those matches. The reason I offer you that is because look at how great Dominic Reyes is, right? We all know that. He's undefeated. Of 10 fights going to that, stopped 9 guys. Now he's 11-0, stopped 9 guys. I mean, really impressive, and Ozdemir turned out that he was even better than him. So I offer you that because when you look at it, and sometimes you dismiss guys because they don't have big names. That is one of the problems at 205 pounds right now. Aside from Luke Rockhold, I don't know that I could impress you, and I'm not taking the usual suspects, right? I'm not taking Glover Teixeira's and Anthony Smith's and Alexander Gustafsson. I'm saying that there's going to be some new blood in there. I don't know how much I could impress you and win you over with a name. Thiago Santos comes to mind. Straight up hammer, right? Comes to mind as a top contender for Jon Jones. Makes it a little bit tougher to build a card around. So when I look at that of who the contender is for Jones, there's two different perspectives. If you're just looking at Jon Jones, the competitor, that's looking to go out there and create some distance from himself, his records that he already holds, and whatever the next 2 or 3 generations are that may come along and try to make a run at his records, okay, great. Stay in the division, fight whoever they put in front of you. Everything's fine. Cool in the gang. But I can't help but look at it and go, but there is another side to that. If that's a competitive side, man, I'm on board with that. I support it. I love it. And I'll keep my mouth shut. If there's the business side of it, where you were trying to go and get those, right, air quotes, big fights, I think it's going to be incumbent on Jon Jones to start to look for those challenges. Jon Jones has a problem. If you're looking at it from the business side, he has a problem with being so dominant. Roy Jones Jr. had this same problem. He was the best boxer of the 90s, the best boxer of an entire decade. He's 50 years old and he's still having to get in there and box, and he's not doing it because he wants to. He couldn't make any money. Roy Jones was so good that it lacked the imagination of the audience that he could possibly get beat. Nobody reads a story that they know the ending to. And nobody watches a sports event if they know the ending. If you can reasonably predict, if you can heavily predict, if you cannot get excited that it could be a switch outcome, it's very hard. The Super Bowl will bring in 25 million people. It will never, ever be replayed. All right. I mean, do you get the point here? So that's one of the problems with Jon. He's so damn good. What's he going to do? And I don't want him to have that. I don't want him to end up like that. I want him to get his due. I want him to pack arenas. I want him to do huge numbers. I want him to be celebrated. The same reason that people were watching Michael Jordan. There was nobody opposite the court that could go with Michael Jordan when he was playing either, but he was selling out arenas. He was such a rare skill, you would just turn in to see him. There's only been 2 guys in the history of boxing, and I bring up boxing, not even MMA, because boxing goes back so much further. 2 guys in the history of boxing that could sell on their own. Without having a good dance partner, without having somebody across the ring that could either invoke an emotion, open an imagination, or have some kind of a personal feud with. Oscar De La Hoya could sell just being Oscar De La Hoya, and Mike Tyson could sell just being Mike Tyson. Didn't matter if he was taking on Peter McNeely. If Mike Tyson was there, you were watching because there was something special and unique. I think you could probably even extend that to Floyd Mayweather in many ways. Floyd, for a number of years, has been boxing guys that nobody had heard of until Floyd made you hear of them. So I think in many ways you should also open that category to Floyd. But in MMA, it's tough. Brock, maybe. Brock always did have good partners across from him, but maybe if he didn't, he could still draw. Conor always did have a storyline behind him, but if he didn't, maybe could. Never been put in that position, so he can't fall into that category. And in many ways, I think you would have to couple George in with that. I think there was a few matches that we were more than aware of how the outcome was going to be, and George still did very well. So it's just a tough spot. It's a tough spot Jon's in. So when I'm asked that question of who can come up and challenge him, I interpret that a little bit differently than everybody else. When most people are asked who can challenge him, they're straight up talking about, can anybody take that belt from Jon? Is there anybody that can push Jon? Is there anybody that could, if we give them 5 rounds, could they win a round with Jon? That is how most people would break that down. I hear it differently. Who can Jon do great business with? That's the way I hear that question. And if you want an answer to that, I really do think that I'm right, that it's going to be incumbent upon Jon to go find that guy. And Jon's already saying some stuff that I find interesting. I mean, it is foreshadowing. It is greatly down the road, but he's already started to talk about Israel Adesanya. And Israel's already starting to talk about Jon. As much as you guys might go, oh, I don't know if I want to see that fight. Well, give it a little bit of time. If Izzy goes and becomes a 185-pound champion, and now you're talking about a super fight, he starts to get his brand and his name and his exposure out there a little bit more, give him a couple of fights. You're talking about a totally different landscape than perhaps you're imagining right now. Now, let me look at the other side of the coin. Let's see Izzy doesn't get the strap. And then he's looking for something new to do. So he bumps up to 205 pounds and grabs a win or two. Yeah, I think you would be interested in Jon. Now, I realize I'm stretching a little bit here, but I feel like the way that division is set up, it requires some stretching. It's not a real clear architect or blueprint or recipe. It requires some imagination. So I'm offering you a little bit. Now, another way to go that would be an easier and quicker sell would be to bump Jon up to heavyweight, which people have been looking at doing and would also be very exciting because if you got him to heavyweight against anybody, if you just got him to heavyweight, you could then start to have a very realistic conversation and expectation that you will see Jon versus Daniel again, which I think ultimately is the biggest fight in the sport you could make right now. I really do. Conor Khabib, you could not make right now. They're on suspension. I think the biggest fight you could make right now that you guys will get, I'm going to stop what I'm doing. I'm going to order up some pizzas. I'm going to have some friends over and I'm going to make sure I tune in. I really think that it's that fight. And the first thing you got to do is get him in the division. Now, with that same thought, Ariel hit me with a curveball. Ariel told me that he is hearing talks. When Ariel says I'm hearing talks, Ariel knows. Ariel is a journalist. He does not come. I'm a speculator. Ariel doesn't speculate. He says I'm hearing that both parties have agreed, that both parties are interested, rather. Now listen to this one. If you guys missed the show, listen to what Ariel said. Jon Jones at heavyweight versus, and I know you're all going to think I'm either going to say Daniel Cormier or Brock Lesnar. I'm not. Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic. Whoa, that got my attention. Really? Stipe Miocic, who has kind of been sitting out and playing hardball and nothing but a championship, all of a sudden is willing to come to the table for Jon Jones. That's compelling as hell to me. It really is. And it does serve the purpose of setting somebody big up for Daniel. Because whoever comes out of that fight, people are going to go, okay, I want to see you take on Daniel. People want to see Daniel take on Stipe right now. Stipe has a big bandwagon behind that. Absolutely he does. But that will get exemplified should he get the jump on Jon Jones and vice versa. Jon Jones slides up, takes out Stipe, boom. I mean, you can really set up a storyline and a narrative and an expectation for the rest of 2019 should you be able to get that fight done. Now, Jon's side has come out and said, you know what, he's not as big as he used to be. In fact, 205 205 is no problem. I think we're just going to stay at 205 for now. Okay, great. Okay, great. That would serve one master, which is the competitive side. If that's what he wants to do, is to compete and keep on racking up wins and defenses and do it at 205, great. I'm just talking to you from a different standpoint, which is where are the big and mega fights. I can tell you Jon's numbers are greatly down. They were very good for Gus, and he had a little bit of headwind going into that. Don't forget Gus Part 2. First off, the laws of supply and demand kicked in. There was no Jon Jones for 15 months. Jon Jones was not on the shelf. All of a sudden, Jon Jones gets put on the shelf. Some shoppers come down the aisle and throw him in the cart. Great. Gus also opened up an imagination. People had wanted that fight. They wanted to see that fight again. Part 1 was extremely competitive. Many would say the greatest fight in the history of the light heavyweight division. I am one of those people. It's fantastic. Did all of these different things and all of these different storylines going into that fight. Did a good night of business. Jon's numbers significantly dropped after that. And I don't just mean Livegate and pay-per-view. His number, his media request dropped. There was just something different. And things just needed to be right. And he took a nicer approach instead of more of, that rougher edge approach. And a lot of different factors that go into it. I'm just saying, if you want to do really big fights for Jon, I think Jon does want some big fights. I think Jon's want both things. I think he wants to be real competitive. I think he wants to stay real busy. That's good news for everybody. I think he also wants big fights. That's going to require just a little bit more thought. I think possibly I like the answer of bump him up. I love that. I'm a big supporter. All of a sudden you got new parity. You can do Jon Jones 5 different ways. Jon Jones and Kane. Jon Jones and Ngannou. Jon Jones and Daniel. Jon Jones and Brock, very unlikely, but all of a sudden at least he's in the division. Jon Jones and Stipe. Very, very interesting match.